Now let's take a closer look at the second major strategy, which is tolerance. Failure to tolerate inflammatory causes is well illustrated in the 1918 flu epidemic. It lasted from January 1918 to December 1920, coming right at the end of the First World War. It infected about 500 million people, and it killed 50 to 130 million people, or about 3% of the population of the planet. Most of the victims, and this is the interesting point, most of the victims were healthy young adults with strong immune responses. The strain of flu was H1N1, and that label refers to the variants of the hemagglutinin, that's the H, and the neuraminidase, that's the N, to the variants of those two genes whose products are displayed on the surface of the virus, and they are the ones that interact with the host immune system. The virus elicits overexpression of cytokines and chemokines. It triggers what's called a cytokine storm that promotes inflammation. People experiencing the cytokine storm most strongly were the ones with the healthiest immune systems that could react the most strongly, their lungs filled with fluid, and many victims then died of secondary bacterial pneumonia. So this is an example both of incompatible defenses against viral and bacterial infections and of failure to tolerate inflammatory damage in a vital organ, the lung. Here we have graphs at the top showing the influenza case rates by age group. So this is the rate of clinical influenza here, and what you see is that it was fairly high in infants and juveniles, and then it declined with age. However, down here in the lower panel we see the rates of bacterial pneumonia and mortality. So the percentage who had pneumonia here is in blue, and you can see it spikes at about 20 to 30 years of age, and then drops, and it continues to drop all the way through to older people. And then the influenza and pneumonia-related mortality rate here is in red, and that's highly interesting because very young people between the ages of 5 and 10 had very low mortality rates, and you would expect higher mortality rates in the very old, and they do climb somewhat, but look at the spike in mortality rates of people who are right about 30 years old. So that is a clear signal that the body is responding inappropriately, not tolerating the infection, and inducing a response that made possible subsequent bacterial pneumonia. So the main idea on inflammatory tolerance is that hosts use inflammation to reduce infection intensity until the cost of the immune response is larger than the cost of infection in the absence of inflammation. If those people in the 1918 flu epidemic had been obeying that rule properly, many, many fewer would have died. However, this is not what happened in that case. A classic case of tolerance is simian immunovirus in its natural hosts, for example, African green monkeys. This is the primate analog of HIV in humans. The monkeys have the pathogen, it replicates in them, it produces viral loads similar to those in humans who have HIV, but the monkeys do not progress to a disease that resembles AIDS. The mechanisms include these. They resolve the immune reaction soon after being infected. There are fewer target cells which are infected, and they are protected from mother-infant transmission. So they have co-evolved with this virus for quite a while, and this is how they've responded. These mechanisms include low immune activation and a lack of disease progression. So they resolve the innate immune response quickly. They down-modulate CD3 TCR, that is signaling. They maintain mucosal integrity and T cell, a certain population of T cells in the gut, and they have limited the infection of CD4 plus T cells, which are one of the targets in our immune system when HIV infects humans. That leads to a low chronic level of chronic immune activation. There is minimal bystander immunopathology. There are low levels of T cell activation and apoptosis. There is a lack of microbial translocation, and there is preserved homeostasis of T cell populations and lymph tissue architecture. So all of that leads to no progression to AIDS in African green monkeys. There are other elements. The virus also has evolved. The specific properties of simian immunovirus accessory proteins result in less pathogenesis in their natural host, so the virus has intrinsically lowered its virulence. The host has also evolved. The natural hosts avoid progression to AIDS by limiting chronic immune activation and bystander immunopathology, as we just summarized. The natural hosts also maintain the integrity of the gut mucosal barrier by preserving the mucosal immune environment, something that does not happen with AIDS. However, this kind of tolerance, which is so illuminating about the things that might be done for a human disease, also has its own costs. Mechanisms that promote tolerance do so at the expense of other functions. Tolerance has indirect costs. If it does not completely remove the negative impact of an infection, then of course the host has the remaining impact to deal with, and that's the cost of relying on tolerance rather than resistance. Many animals tolerate parasitic infections, for example, but their health still does suffer somewhat. So to summarize, avoidance and tolerance are the best choices when resistance is either futile or too costly. Resistance is the best choice when avoidance is impossible and tolerance is going to be insufficient. In most cases, the strategies are combined in the defense response. And failed avoidance, failed or excessive resistance, and insufficient tolerance are all causes of infectious disease.